SHHW. I think Mike used copy here, right? Yeah. 2 up. Right, now remember, this is a what?
1 up.
This is a dwelling, right? What's the voltage of the service? 12240. What's the size of the service? 150 amp. 31015 D7 allows us to go 83% to size our service conductors.
Number one.
83%. The service conductors only need to be rated for 124.5 amps, or 125 amps. Okay, which is for aluminum, what size is it aluminum? 1 aught for aluminum, at 75 degrees.
2 up and 75.
2 aught for aluminum.
In aluminum is good for what, 150, right?
135.
135, that's right, 150 amp service, 135, okay, so it'll be 2 aught. 1 aught for aluminum is good for what? 150? 120, okay, 120 amps. So the 1 aught aluminum would be a little small here, okay, for 150 amp service. Because if you go to that table, in the 2011 code, it's gonna tell you 2 aught aluminum. Okay? All right, so if you go copper, of course, is number 1, which is rated at 130 amps. So listen to the question, ask them what you know. All right, now. All right, I want to get through this as quick as possible because we have to finish up. We have to finish up single-family dwellings, standard and optional, multi-family dwellings, standard and optional. We have to. All right, because Tuesday, we'll do commercial calculations, and then Thursday, we'll do about the first hour of commercial calculations, okay? Or so that it's only gonna leave, first hour and a half, we'll need to do commercial calculations on Thursday. That leaves us about 2 hours or so, a little less than that, on our test. All right, so, again, I mean, that's fine, I just would rather have done a couple more of those 5-point questions on Thursday next week. But we'll be fine. We're good, okay? Now, the good news is everything that you just learned for that standard calculation, I want you to forget about it. Did I say everything? I mean everything. But the good news is, this next method is simple. Okay, it's simple. Right. Now, I told you to forget everything. However, remember the neutral calculation that we just did? They do allow you in the optional calculation to use that method for your neutral calculation. You can reduce it by 70% for what type of appliances? Ranges. Yeah, ranges and dryers. Okay, ranges and dryers. Cooking equipment, basic cooking equipment and dryers. All right. You may not get challenged on that. All right. You'd be worried. I want you to learn how to do it, but if you're challenged on it, you may just get it once. Yes.
Are we in order service grounding conductors at all?
Yes. Yes, we will. Okay. So now I want you to take a look at part 3 of Article 220. Part 3 of Article 220, and I don't have a lot of time to do this. So the best way for me to teach this is have you go to 220.82. And while you're there, notice we're in part 4, right? And what is part 4? Optional feature service load calculation. I've highlighted that part 4 there, but that's up to you. Okay? So we can use this optional calculation in lieu of parts 2 and 3 of what we just did. This, all these steps and all these rules, okay? If we use the optional calculation, forget about everything we just learned, right? So look what it says in 220.82a. This section applies to a dwelling having the total, highlight or underline the word total, the total connected load served by a single 120 240 volt or a 120 208 volt 3-wire service or feeder conductors with an ampacity of what? 100 amps or greater. Highlight that. Because guess what? You could get a question where you calculate it, and they tell you to use the optional calculation, all right? And the answer is 80 or 90 amp service size. Using the optional they'll tell you to use the optional calculation, get it? What's the answer?
100 or greater.
The answer is 100, okay? In other words, if you calculate it, and it comes to 80 amp, let's say you calculate your load as 78.8 amps. What's the next standard size for that?
100.
No, well, under normal conditions. Per 240.6a, the next standard size would be 80, correct? But this rule tells you the next standard size is actually what? 100 amp. The minimum is 100. You can't use this optional calculation unless you have 100 amp service. Okay, so just watch that little trick that they'll have you calculated, and it comes to 80 amps, or it comes to 90 amps, okay? And guess what one of the answers will be? 80 or 90, all right? But the answer is 100, right? Okay. With an ampacity of 100 amp or greater, it shall be permissible to calculate the feeder and service load in accordance with this section instead of what we just did in part 3. Okay? The calculated load shall be the result of, now this is where it gets easy, adding. Highlight that word or underline that word, adding. Adding what? The loads from 22082B and C. Okay, now look below 220.82. You see there's a B? And there's a C. Everybody see that?
Yep.
You add, you look at B, you get your answer. You look at C, you get the answer. You add the two up. You're done. You're done, all right? I do not want you flipping back to part 3 when you're doing an optional calculation. There is no need. Okay, the only possibility would be if they asking you to calculate the neutral load. And to be honest with you, you don't even need to look at 220.61B1, do you? Because you know it's 70% of what? The cooking equipment and 70% of the ranges for your neutral calculation, for your neutral conductor. So you can go back to 220.61B1 just to check it if you want, fine, but that would be the only time that you are going to be going back to part 3. All right? I want you to stick right here in 220.82B and C. Do not leave that. Do not wander from that. If you stick with that and stick with that alone, just obey B and obey C. Add the two up. Do not do them simultaneously. Do B, do C, then add them up. That's why I had you highlight the word adding together, okay? Don't combine them until you're finished each one individually. Then combine B with C. All right? So now let's take a look at B for a second. 220.82B. What does it say? There's a demand that is applied to B only. Look what it says. The general calculated load shall not be less than 100% of first 10 kVA, highlight that, plus 40% of the remainder of the following loads. B, we're talking about the loads in B. So you've got that demand. The first 10 kVA is at 100%, the remainder is at 40%. That is applied to B only. Okay? Now look at B. All you gotta do is what we're kind of used to already. 3 volt amps a square foot. That's number 1. Number 2, two 1500 VA circuits for the small appliances. Look else what it's in number 2. 1500 VA for what? The laundry. Okay, so we know that number 2 is what? 4500 VA, as long as there's only one kitchen. Is it possible that they may ask you a question if there's 2 kitchens?
Yes.
Then what's the additional load for the 2 kitchens? Well, not 4,500, or another 3,000. Now, if they tell you there's 2 laundry rooms, then the additional load would be another 4,500 total, okay? So keep an eye on that. I haven't seen a calculation where there's 2 kitchens. I may have missed it. DC might have it, Virginia might have it, but I just don't think that's gonna be the norm, okay? But look, if it is, it's a piece of cake. All right, it's a piece of cake for you, okay? All right, now, so that's 1 and that's 2. And then look at number 3. This is where it gets really easy. Highlight where it says the nameplate. The nameplate. And then guess what? It gives you all the different appliances, and you just add up the nameplate. That's all you gotta do. And then when you're finished the nameplate, if there's the KV rating of permanently connected motors that are not included in number 3. Garbage disposal is gonna be included in 3. Right, cause it's an appliance, correct? All appliances that are fastened in place, permanently connected or located to be on a specific circuit, that's definitely a garbage disposal. That's definitely a dishwasher, okay? And then they list some other appliances and cooking equipment. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, you add them up, and then do what? Apply the demand. And then apply the demand. All right, that's B. Then you jump to C. And the C is the HVAC equipment, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these rules for an optional calculation for the dwelling. 220.82B we just discussed. In B, the first 100% is at 10 kVA, the remainder is at 40%, right? Now, 220.82C. This is where it gets a little tricky, but once you understand this heat pump thing, all right, C is gonna be a piece of cake. All right, so obviously if you've got an air conditioner, let's say you've got a house that's got air conditioner only. All right, 100%. 100%, there's no demand on it, okay? Heat pump only, 100%. Now what about if you have a heat pump with electric backup heat, with supplemental heat? The heat pump is always 100%. Okay? As long as you understand that the heat pump is always 100%, that's gonna help you understand what to do anytime you have supplement heat. Okay? Like in my house, in my main house, I've got a 20 kW backup electric heat with a heat pump. So at my house, I would find out what my heat pump amps are, and then I would take 65% of that 20 kW. That's my calculation for one of my units in my house. Okay? And notice, what about if there was just heat? Just heat, okay? And there was 3 independent thermostatically controlled heaters. Like baseboard heaters, right? I got one in this room, I got one in the other room, I got one in the kitchen. 3 independently controlled baseboard electric heaters, 65%. Okay? And then what about if I had 4 or more independently thermostatically controlled electric heaters? Again, this is a lot of old school stuff here, because you know, when I started wiring houses, there was a ton of houses that didn't have air conditioning, no snarky responses here, okay? And they had electric baseboard heat, right? And they may have 6, 7, 8 thermostats, you know. In the bedrooms, each has a thermostat, family room's got a thermostat, kitchen's got a thermostat, bathroom's got thermostats. That's what this calculation is basically for. Basically. Doesn't say that, right? But that's basically what it's for. But it doesn't matter, just look for the wording. If you have electric heat, that there's 4 or more, it's 40%. You just add up all that resistance heat, and then multiply times 40%. That's C. That's C. All right, so really, that's the only thing you gotta keep an eye out in 220.82C. Once you calculate this C, whatever one of these it is, you calculate it, you add it to B. This does not have a demand on it, does it? The demand is in here. Okay, the demand is in the electric heat. Basically, that's the only thing that you have a demand on, isn't it? Is the electric resistance heat. And it's either gonna be what percentage? 65 or 40?
40.
40's a no-brainer. I gotta have 4 thermostats or more. That makes sense, doesn't it? If you got 4 thermostats, that means they're cycling, they're on and off, and then that's why they're giving you a demand of 40% rather than 65. That's common sense, right? And I joked with you guys at our first class, is don't think like an electrician, but if you also recall, I said, don't throw away your common sense. That totally makes sense, doesn't it? The more thermostats you've got, the more demand, the less demand, I should say. That's why you have the demand factors of only 40%. Makes total sense, okay? So let's go ahead and apply this in this question. All right, optional calculation. So we haven't had a break yet. How about we finish this calculation, since we're already 3/4 of the way through it? Let's finish this, and then we'll take a break when we're done here, okay? We can either open that window up or I can put the air conditioner on. It's starting to get a little warm. All right, let me crank this up for a little bit, and we'll see what it looks like, okay? All right, so we have a 1,500 square foot house. Remember, minimum 100 amp service is required for an optional calculation, right? And we're gonna start in 220.82B. It gives us the demand factors for B. Now let's take a look at the loads, and let's go through B and just simply add them up, and then apply that simple demand. So, this 1,500 square foot dwelling it's got 3 appliances right off the bat. It's got a dryer, it's got a range, it's got an air conditioner, and then it's got 8 kW backup. All in 1,500 watt house. So just remember, I do not want you going back or even thinking about what's required in part 3. I just want you obeying 220.82B, and then ultimately C. Do B first, don't even think about the heat and air conditioning until you finish B. Complete B. Do the demands, do everything with B. Once you get your answer, then you can jump to C. Okay?
On the range, do we go back to that, or do
Does anybody have a baseball bat?
I'm just making sure.
Did I answer your
Like that,
question?
right,
Yeah.
Okay.
Any more questions?
You said questions.
You're just checking, aren't you? Yeah. You don't want to waste your time. I understand. Does everybody have a copy of the important tables that we handed out that Todd brought in? You not have one? I got an extra one here.